Welcome to Kokoro Conversations. I'm Alex Lang.
I'm Rebekah Anderson.
And today we're going to be talking about the concept of happiness. I think it's something that's universal that we all seek in our lives. And I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to kind of plumb the depths of why it is we're always searching for happiness, what it means to us as people, and kind of how we can do better in our lives when we're searching for happiness and maybe not finding it in the ways that we want to. So I want to start with a fundamental question that I think a lot of us think about as we get older, which is, what was the happiest time of your life? Like, when were you the happiest version of yourself? What do you think?
I was thinking about it and I thought about all these times when I felt like a real freedom. So one of the times that came to mind for me specifically was there was this period of time where I was really kind of locked into a way of living that I wasn't really choosing for myself necessarily. And I'd kind of lost touch of the fact that I had choice in my own life. And basically through several decisions, several difficult things, I chose to break free from some relationships, from some patterns in my own behavior. And the time after that, I was so free and so kind of overjoyed. Thinking through all of that helped me to appreciate that freedom helps me to feel a real sense of joy and happiness, like a real deep sense of contentedness.
So it's kind of like the contrast then. I think that's interesting because it's like, when you talk about the happiest moment for you, it was when you came from like a really dark period in your life,
Yes.
and then the opposite. So it's like, it's interesting because I think within that, something about happiness, which I think is really true, is how happiness comes as a result of appreciating a place of where you were, yes?
I think to a certain extent. I mean, thinking through all of that actually got me to a totally different place though, because it helped me to appreciate that the happiest I feel is actually like right now, because I've been able to come through that kind of a period of intensity. I was able to apply some of what I learned in that situation to something else that I went through, and kind of the sense of inner peace that that's brought me, mixed with the strong relationships that I've been able to build since, the changes in other relationships that I've been able to make as a result of that, have all kind of brought me to a period where I feel really a sense of happiness and joy with where I'm at. But you're totally right to say that like it's entirely kind of a result of having come through a difficult time.
I mean, I thought you were going to say the reason why you were the happiest is because you're hanging out with me now. But that's okay. I will not. I won't take that to heart too badly. Like
It's true,
It's not.
Alex.
It's not. I thought it was be about me because it's about me always.
I was gonna say, every episode there's one thing that we can come away from, and that's that
about me.
everything is about you.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting for me. It's similar. Like probably, objectively, kind of the happiest I was actually came as a result of my sophomore year of college. They had actually cut our men's swim team at Rice. So I swam my freshman year. It was a really hard year. And that was like my whole community, right? Because it's like when you're doing a sport in college, particularly, I mean, really any division, but D1 in particular is really intense. So you're training like 4 or 5 hours a day. Yeah. And just you're spending all your time with these people. And then they kind of eliminated our team. To be honest, we weren't very good. But they it was kind of like a Title IX thing. They were making room for more female athletes. And they needed the money from our team to give it to them, which, it's great in fairness and equality, but they cut our team out. And so the next year I come back and, I'm talking to these guys who I spend the time with, and a lot of those people, they were getting ready to go to their graduate studies. A lot of them were going to medical school. So they were really focused on they didn't have time for me. Like, I'm a sophomore, that's just not in their kind of, in their wheelhouse of what they really need to do right now. So that whole year, it was really depressing for me. I was mostly by myself. I was so depressed that I started a charity because I had so much extra time on my hands. Like, I literally started a charity where I was recycling computers in the university to give them away to kids in Houston. So I remember I got to a point where I was like, you know what, I gotta change, like I gotta do something different. So I went and I applied to Oxford University for a study abroad program, and I didn't think I'd get in, but I was just like, I'll just try. And I got in, and I went over, and it wasn't even that getting there initially was like fantastic. It took me, I'm an introvert, so it took me a long time to kind of really delve into those relationships. But I would say like probably after Christmas, like after the first trimester I was there and I came back, that was when I was like, oh, like this feels like it felt like the community that you it felt like what I had back when I was swimming again. So it was, that became, and then the happiest time of my life, because when I was there, I could travel, I could go to all these different places. Like we did all these things that were kind of just, you're able to do in a place like that. And then you're around some of truly the smartest people in the world. And so it's really humbling and it's really neat to be part of it. So for me, I look back on that and I was like, wow, that was the happiest moment. But just like you, it was because I came out of this place of intense darkness and feeling just really isolated and alone that it allowed for that to happen.
Yeah. I completely understand. And like you're talking about the travel too. I mean, like this sort of being in this amazing place and finding that you have the capacity to create a community around you while you're there, that you're able to learn and do all these things. Like that was very much my initial kind of like coming out of that place of darkness that brought me such a deep sense of happiness. I had just graduated from graduate school. So I was living in Princeton, New Jersey. I had a job, but it was a job that I had to kind of work part-time or they would have to pay me like full benefits. And so I didn't have to work a ton. I could kind of make my own hours, but I lived like an hour from New York City, an hour from Philly. I had a great job. I was working with wonderful people and had a strong sense of community with the people that I worked with, and essentially like found a real depth to the relationships I could find elsewhere and to the freedom of being able to kind of like go and explore and find that I could create the kind of community and life that I wanted. And so I totally understand what you mean about sort of coming out of that period of darkness. I feel like it gives you such an appreciation for the world that's out there that you didn't know was there.
So like what's interesting, so I think this is the thing that I wonder about that. Why does displacement, because what you're talking about is displacement, right? Like I was displaced into like a foreign land and that shook me out of it. You were displaced out of a relationship, you had graduated from school, so you had kind of like this thing you were doing. Why do you, I think it's, I don't understand necessarily in my own mind, I haven't worked it through, but there is a sense that displacement does allow for kind of, maybe it's a reorientation around understanding what is important in life, and kind of like forcing yourself to move into something new and different often creates the possibility, it's not always guaranteed, but it creates the possibility of this kind of change that you can feel better about yourself when you're not feeling great at the time.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting, what comes to mind is that it feels like a real paradox to me, because as human beings, we crave a real sense of safety, security, and kind of routine. And at the same time, when we get too stuck in that routine, we find that our capacity to feel excitement, to feel happiness, to feel joy is less accessible. And so on the other side of that, we're human beings that also crave novelty and crave new experiences, crave a sense that we do have some capacity within us to do something new and something meaningful. And I think the sad reality of the way that our lives function and the way our worlds work, especially in the Western world, is that given the monotony that's kind of so natural to the way that our kind of lives at work go, the way that our lives at home go, is that we do end up typically coming to like a same, like this monotonous way of just doing the same thing.
Well, it's like life, right? I mean, that's the problem, is like at a certain point, particularly, early on in life, if you think about it, like everything changes for you all the time. So it's like elementary school, maybe it lasts through 4th or 5th grade. Then you go to middle school. So it's like every 3 to 4 years, 5 years, you're changing. And then if you're fortunate enough, maybe you can afford to go to college, and then from there, maybe it's graduate school or whatever it is that you're doing. And then you're like, you're working a job. But then what happens is like after that first 20 to 25 years, right? Particularly if you get into some type of maybe long-term relationship or you have children, then, all of a sudden, and I know that in the sociology world, like particularly children are known as like anchors, like they anchor you down where you have to, your life now is displaced in a sense. Like there's a displacement in the sense that your life is no longer really about you. You have to, you're trying to raise these children. And so for you, you're really putting all your energy into that. And then it becomes harder to create opportunities. Whereas like your whole life up to that point, for the most part, was you've always got this opportunity to change and shift and do things differently. So it becomes really a matter at that point, I think for a lot of people, is that you have to be really intentional about bringing a certain amount of displacement to your life. Like if you feel like you're in a rut and you're not getting anywhere, then I think that there's like you have to actively choose to say this is something in particular. And if you're fine, like if there's no issue with it, that's one thing, right? Like if you're like I like my life, I don't really feel anything is wrong. But I think for a lot of people, when they get into that, at some point along the way, they sense, something's not right. I'm not maybe living my life the way I envisioned it, or I'm doing this kind of patterned, rudimentary, every day is the same and I don't really have choices, which maybe that's just what you have to do in this moment in your life and you don't have a choice in it. I know when you have little ones, that's just reality, right? Yeah. It's very hard to jump out of that. So I think that at a certain point you do have to make an active decision if you're going to shift and change, particularly if you feel like you are missing something in your life.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it brings out like some other paradoxes and challenges to that, which is the truth is like similar to this idea that we desperately want safety and comfort. The truth is so much of our lives is about avoiding calamity. The truth is in our relationships, we don't want to have a lot of conflict. And I also think like a big part of happiness for most people is the state of our relationships with the people who matter most to us. So it's not like, the truth is that having children, having that anchor is its own form of displacement. Children are growing and changing all the time. That brings out its own form of displacement. And if your children are changing, your relationship to them is changing, your relationship to the spouse that you're co-parenting with is always changing in relationship to them. So there is this internal form of displacement. We want to avoid conflict and struggle in relationships, but what we know to be the truth is that displacement and conflict and challenge bring great depth to our lives. And so ideally, like I know that this is true for me. If I deal with some sort of challenge or some kind of difficulty in a relationship with a friend, or even if I'm going through something personally and they're willing to walk with me, even though they're not necessarily directly connected to that thing that creates some kind of displacement in my life, the depth of my relationship with that person just grows. And so the way that we work in our world is we're trying to avoid that a lot because we want happiness. And I think we conflate happiness with comfort. And the truth is, happiness tends to not come from comfort. We increase our capacity for joy, for connection, through struggle. And through getting better at going through struggle without
it's like what we talked about a little earlier, right? Like it's from when we think about, where I had my most happy time, it was coming from a place of deep darkness that you then say, I feel better now. And I think that you're right. I think it comes out of, there is a sense that to find happiness, you need conflict because it's contrast, right? That's the interesting thing is that when we're talking about jumping into the sometimes drudgery of raising children, because it's just day in, day out, it can be the same. There's beauty in it too, but it can be hard. is that you lose contrast because every day is the same. So like the reason why you can find happiness, why I found out happiness at Oxford, you found happiness outside of your relationship, is that it was just such a contrast to what you've been doing, and you're like, wow, this is so much better. Now, but this brings up another interesting question, right? Let's talk about this idea of, should a person strive for happiness all the time? Like, do you think that's, first of all, do you think that's attainable? And secondly, is it something that we should be looking for in our lives?
To me, I almost feel that happiness is something that lies within us at any given time. It's kind of a state of being, but it's not like we have to be happy all the time. I think that that's what's so unfortunate is, like you said, our society is like, it says you should be happy all the time. The truth is, if we're happy all the time, if we pretend like, it's a state of pretending because...
Yeah, well, I mean, and I go back, this is interesting. I think this is a kind of a fascinating aspect of what we think about in our culture and society, and we compare that to other cultures. So like in Greek culture, for example, their concept was happiness was something that came about as a result of, like, it's for them it was very temporary. So it was something that came about as a result of like good fortune, maybe you got an inheritance and you got some money, it's good luck. But they very much looked at it as it's something that's it's temporary. It's like a quick hit of dopamine and you feel good for a minute. And they kind of understood that that's a great feeling, but it's not something that is sustainable over a long period of time. In fact, they even talk about how it shouldn't be something that you seek out as a continuous thing, because that type of happiness, I mean, that's more akin to something like a drug addiction, right? Where it's like you get a hit, you feel good, but then you come down off of it.
Yeah.
And then you get a hit again, and then you come down. Now, when we were talking about our happiest moments, we're talking about something that, as you were saying, is something much more fundamental to your being. Yeah. And so maybe the word happiness, I've always thought this, maybe that's not the right word, because to say, like, have you ever, like, the feeling when you order something that and the box comes and you open up, like you get that quick hit, right? It's oh, this is cool, like I got this. But then once you have it, right?
Yeah,
it's
very fleeting. Yeah. And to me, I can remember talking about this so many years ago, and it really like fundamentally changed the way I think about life in general. I mean, happiness is a temporal state. It's something that we move through very quickly. And it's something that I think, honestly, we do have the capacity to find within ourselves in moments that we would least expect it. Like, you can be experiencing something really hard and find a happy moment. But to me, like, a state of joy or finding joy in your life is something that's much more accessible than like happiness.
Well, it's funny you bring up joy, because that is kind of if we're going to compare cultures again, in Greek culture, the concept of joy for them was something that was deep inside your being. It actually was something that was granted to you by the gods, like in a sense, like it was something that came from the gods. And so in a sense, the concept of joy is a much more internal part of who you are in your soul kind of thing. There's a soul element to it. Whereas happiness is kind of based on the external world. Like it's the things that the external world can do for you. Oh, I ate that meal. That was so good. Oh, that meal made me happy. Or I had some really good dessert that made me happy, right? So it's like happiness is the external world kind of creating moments of feeling good. Whereas joy is something that's much deeper. It's something inside of who you are as a person, right?
Yeah. That's such a helpful distinction, because the truth is happiness is, number one, it's fleeting, and number two, it's kind of removed from our own capacity to create it. I mean, if it's totally external, then the truth is we have limited power to create the circumstances.
Or if we convince ourselves that we deserve to be happy all the time, we switch pieces. So it's like, oh, I'm in a relationship with somebody. You know what? This person just doesn't make me happy anymore. So maybe they're still a really good person, but because you've hit that kind of doldrum in your relationship where it's all kind of going the same, you sit there and you say, I'm gonna move this piece out. This isn't good, right?
Yeah.
You know what would make me happy? Because I just don't feel good. Maybe I need a new car. Or you know what? Let's just buy a new house. Like that's really neat, right? So like you're creating these moments of being dislocated. Like literally, you're creating dislocation, right?
Yeah.
Like in the way that we were kind of talking about before. Of like if you get, let's say you divorce your spouse. Well, that creates a huge opportunity for something new. The question is that necessarily going, you're going to bring somebody new in, right? So it's like, okay, I get rid of this one, I bring in somebody new. But if your concept is this person has to make me happy all the time, you're going to end up in the same position because everything over time gets old.
Yeah. It's very frivolous too. I mean, it's like your worth to me is entirely contingent on the hit of dopamine I can get from you for whatever period of time that works. And I think too, like your question about striving is so interesting because when I think about this concept that we've been calling joy, to me, I love this. I was recently introduced to this concept of, I think it's from the Buddhist tradition, but it's a concept of near enemy. And it's this idea that like sometimes something we want, it masquerades as like we think we want something. What we ultimately want and how we actually get them, what we want is so different. So it's this sort of idea that like, well, I want to show someone that I care when they've gone through a loss. And so you go like, oh, I'm so sorry. I feel really bad that happened to you. When if a person is suffering, what they want is somebody who's willing to not just be like, oh, poor you. They want somebody who's willing to like come up next to them and say like, I really care about what happened and I connect with you. And so what we think will help us connect with that person actually creates disconnection. And to me, I feel like the concept of near enemy comes with this like constant seeking happiness. What you want is this thrill. Like it ultimately becomes like thrill seeking, more or less. Like you want something that's going to make you feel good. You want something that's maybe in some ways even going to numb you out to whatever pain you're feeling, which is, I think, sometimes what people are doing with seeking happiness.
And I think that, I think that's and I think what we're getting at is this concept of newness, right? Newness is often what creates happiness. You spoke to earlier the idea of novelty is something that we desire in our life, and that's part of like particularly in relationships where you run into this situation of you've been with somebody for a long time and you get to know them to such a degree that novelty often wears off. And so, in relationships where they're not going well, if there's nothing fundamentally kind of wrong with the relationship, clearly there may be things with communication or whatever. What therapists will often say is go out and, have an experience, like go do something new together. Because in a sense, it's very interesting. Like when you think about when you fall in love with somebody for the first time, right? Mm-hmm. What are you doing? Well, you meet somebody, you're doing all these things together that you wouldn't normally do. So you're having experiences, and those experiences bond you to each other. Yeah. And that bonding comes from literally the novelty, the newness of the relationship of doing those things. But the thing is that you can recreate that again if you go out. And you even if you've been with somebody for 15, 20, 30 years, if you go out and seek novelty together, you can have that again. But the problem is that when you get into your rut, when you get into the things that you're doing, and then if you buy into that societal concept, which truthfully, I think a lot of that, if we're going to like dig down into happiness as you deserve to be happy all the time, some of that really is built into a capitalistic model of society because, for capitalism to work, you have to continually purchase goods. Yeah. And so if there's a sense, and they do this in advertising, they do it subtly, but they do it well, which is the idea that if you have this particular product, it's going to make your life better. And in making your life better, right, they're like, you say, I want that thing. That thing is going to make my life better. What you're really doing underneath that, like kind of the philosophical thing that's happening that you don't even think about subconsciously, is you're saying that thing's going to make me happy. Like exactly. That, like it's going to complete a part of who I am.
Yeah, if you just buy this product, the things in your life will come into place. And what's so interesting is that capitalism is such a fundamental part of our society that's kind of infiltrated every aspect of how we function. So I feel like for me, in a way that I didn't even quite understand, it was like, well, if you simply get this degree, you will feel more complete because that's what you've been seeking after for this many years. That's what you've been directing all of your time and effort into. And it's the same way in relationships. I mean, how much do we hear, like, this person completes me? And I think to myself, like, my gosh, what are our lives if something happens to that person and they complete you?
Right. Well, even bringing that up, I mean, that's a really interesting thing, the idea of you by yourself. Again, this gets at the Greek concept of it, right? You by yourself, you're not enough. And you're looking to the external world. It could be a thing, it could be a person, right? But that's the interesting thing about if we jump back to that concept of joy for a second. Because the concept of joy, it pushes all those other things out of the way. And it says, joy, the world around you is fundamentally not going to necessarily bring you joy. It's something that's in yourself to start with. And and I think that that's something that as I've gotten older, I've really come to appreciate that if I'm not happy or complete, let's not even use the word happy because I think we've kind of said, like, we've kind of shown that's wrong. But let's just say I'm not complete in and of myself. If I'm not whole in and of myself, if I can't find joy in myself, nothing in this world is going to be able to bring, no person, no thing, nothing that I do even or accomplish is going to do that. And that's another thing that we do, right, is that we think that through our work and our jobs, and I'm very guilty of this, like I fall into this pattern more than just about anybody, where you think if I do this thing, that's what's going to make me feel complete and whole. Yeah. And I've accomplished so many projects in my lifetime, and I know I've done it so much that it's like I get to the end. Some of these projects take years to complete, and I get to the end, and you're like, wow, I did it. Well, what's next, right? And so, like, the problem is that completion is not really that didn't change me. I mean, what changed me was the process, right? The process of going through those things.
Yeah. And there is something amazing about realizing that in the midst of those projects, you can change your goal from external validation and from the pursuit of meeting this external goal to finding what it brings out in yourself and what it does for you internally. And I think really, like, those times in my life that were so happy, they brought me deep joy because it helped me to understand a capacity within myself that I wasn't aware of before. And so for me, I'm reminded of, there's this poem that I can remember reading, and it talked about how there is this place, an island within ourselves that no one can ever get past. Or the other example, there's this incredible play, Angels in America, and one of the lines in it, this person who is very physically sick, he's having a dream that's likely because of his illness. And in the dream, this woman looks at him and she says, there is a part of you, the deepest, most important part of you, where there is no illness at all. And I just thought it was like the most beautiful thing, because no matter what's happening around us, no matter how sick our physical body is, no matter how much pain we have in our relationships, there is in every person a part of us that remains and that's unaffected by illness, that's unaffected by the failures we experience. And I think we can so easily, especially in a world that revolves around these capitalist concepts, like, it's so easy to forget that that part of us is in there and that it's kind of a garden. Like, we have to really take good care of it. And when we do that, it grows. And it doesn't mean that we can't pursue those projects that are important to us. The reality is that actually doing those projects and just being clear about what we want out of it. If we want it to succeed in an external way, we are setting ourselves up for feeling really empty and listless. But if we're actually tending to that purely because we know that it has the capacity to bring something beautiful in us, I feel like you can't fail on some level.
So I remember that I was talking to a guy who was a recovering drug addict. And, he was talking about how happiness, he told this story, and it was very interesting. It's kind of like a tale about happiness. And he said that like a long time ago, when the devil and his demons were together, and we can talk about whether or not, those things exist or not, but let's just go with the story, right? The devil and his demons are together, and they're talking about how they want, in order to really control human beings, they need to get rid of happiness. They need to hide happiness. And so one of the demons says, well, what we should do is we should put it on top of the highest mountain, because then, it'll be far away from them. And Satan says, no. They're really they're very like adaptable, these humans. They'll figure out a way up to the top. And then another one says, well, why don't we like get it to the bottom of the sea, like bury it in the ocean? Like they got to get all the way under, then they're gonna have to dig and get there. And they say, no, the humans are really industrious. They'll figure it out. They'll figure out a way to get down there and get it. And then another one pipes up and says, I know where we should hide it. We need to just hide it directly inside of their own hearts, because they'll never think to look there. And I think that, like, I really kind of like that morality tale, in the sense that everything that you have to be whole and complete, to find joy in your life, it's right inside of you. There's nothing more that you really need than what's there. The problem is that the difficulty is that the world, whether it be what the messages the world is sending us, or your experiences in life, maybe you were hurt, maybe you were abused, maybe, you struggled through a lot of things, maybe your mental health is off. Those are clouds that you have to work through to find that in and of yourself. And so, for some people, it's easier than others. Some people have a lot of stuff that's blocking them off from finding that. But I really believe that to be fundamentally true, that within all of us, it's kind of like to the same point you were making, there is that it's right there. And, I would change his word from happiness to joy. I would say there's joy inside of all of us, but you have to kind of find that within your soul. And then that soul, I really feel like what happens is when you find that, it's your realization that actually you're connected to all things.
God, yes.
That's kind of what I have found to be true.
And that's part of why I said at the beginning, like, the happiest time in my life is right now, because yes, like, it was wonderful to be in this beautiful place, to, by the circumstances of my life, have the freedom to go and explore and to kind of like lean into the displacement that allowed me to just appreciate these little things that were all around me. But the truth was, the biggest key learning that I found was that within me, no matter where I go, no matter what I do, is a capacity to find joy and to find what makes me content. And I find that all the time. I mean, sometimes it's just remembering moments of joy that makes me break out laughing, or just remembering these joyful moments, or just feeling this contentedness in myself. And so I do think that's the fascinating thing, is once we experience something that's entirely singular, something that is dependent on no one and nothing but ourselves, we realize in that our interdependence and interconnectedness with everything and with all that lives. And it's, once again, like, it is this fascinating paradox of both being so singular in that and finding in that singularity deepest connections
to everything.
Yeah.
Well, and I think maybe we should, I think there's an interesting question of, if joy is the goal and being whole in yourself is the goal, maybe at some point we need to have a whole conversation around, how do you discover joy? Because we've talked about how happiness is a bit of an illusion. And I think maybe at some point we should come back to this, and we should talk about ways that we find joy in our lives, because that, I think, is a conversation that could help us and people who listen to this try to find those moments in their life so that they can work through all of the challenges and difficulties that may be preventing them from having a feeling of wholeness. And then they're resorting to happiness as a way to feel better about themselves, rather than doing, they're taking the quick hits rather than doing the thing that's going to allow them to be able to feel, good in and of themselves forever. So what do you think? We'll do that in the future?
I love that. Yeah, because the truth is, like, it actually brings me back to a previous conversation. I don't think it's these mountaintop moments that bring us a deep sense of joy and contentedness or even connection. I mean, it's not that they would hurt. I mean, I know that for me, sometimes like the greatest sense of spirituality or like connectedness I can have is from those like brilliant, amazing moments. But more often, like, I'm able to get to that place because of groundwork that was created in these tiny moments. And, another thing that I think could be good to talk about, it's something you've talked about with me because you've known me for a really long time. I grew up in an environment that made it harder for me to appreciate joy. And I still manage to, I think, which is great. But what I found was once I left that environment that was challenging, my capacity for joy increased so much.
Like exponentially, I'm sure, yeah.
But then what I found is like now I'm able to go back into that environment and not find that I'm unhappy or
incapable, or it suppresses your joy.
Yeah, now I go in and I'm able to find that capacity for joy is within me no matter where I go. It doesn't go away.
Well, we'll do that for future conversation. We'll come back to it for sure.
Yeah.
And I hope that you all have enjoyed our conversation around it. If you have anything that you would like to relate about happiness, please let us know in the comments below. And just know that we hope that you find great joy in your life and also little moments of happiness. We all need that as well. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.